do that, but we do want to certainly respect your privacy and your boundaries of what's comfortable for you. So if anybody's sort of not comfortable with it, we can make note of that and make sure we sort of don't use pieces, you know, if we do use it in the future, that we don't use pieces that particularly relate to you. Is everybody okay with the recording?
Are you going to make me a star?
We'll make you a star. Yeah. Any objections? That's great. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Well, maybe we'll jump in and start. Is there everybody? Jackie, we're ready to go?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We're really excited to have you tonight. I think it's going to be a really awesome conversation, and we'll do some quick introductions because we have some new faces, so that you know who we are. So my name's Kim. I'm with Element Q, and I'm an emotional intelligence specialist. And my partner in Element Q is Jackie. I'm pointing off to the side because that's where she is on my screen. Jackie, did you want to?
Hi, I'm Jackie. Thanks for joining us today, and then I'll pass it over to Brad.
Sure, I'm Brad, and I'm a psychotherapist. Yeah, just working in partnership with these two ladies on this great project. So yeah, all things related to narcissism.
And there's a lot. There is a lot. So we know we only have about 90 minutes today, so we wanted to jump right in. Does that work for everybody? Okay. So first things first, I guess, let's chat about, does everybody know what it means, what we mean when we say narcissism? Do we know what a narcissist is? Sort of, yeah. I think that's really accurate, right? Well, we'll talk about it a little bit, and then we are going to jump right into how to be a badass in a narcissistic world, because that's what you're all here for. You want that information. So we're going to share a screen with you.
Okay, Jackie. All right.
Cue Jackie. We're going to share a screen with you, and what this is here. So this is our narcissistic personality disorder. So there are 9 specific traits that are associated with the narcissistic personality disorder. Now, before we go through each of these, I will premise it by saying, in order to be diagnosable as having a narcissistic personality disorder, you would have to meet consistently 5 or more of the 9 traits. Is that accurate, Brad?
Yes, that's correct. 5 of the 9, and then, or 5 or more of the 9. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, as it says at the top, it has to be a pervasive pattern. So, you know, I mean, we can all have moments of demonstrating some of these from time to time. But again, that doesn't necessarily make us narcissistic. In order to actually be fall onto the spectrum and be considered with an actual disorder, yeah, there has to be a pervasive pattern of 5 or more of these particular traits.
Now, it gets a little more complicated than that because narcissism is also a spectrum. So you can be anywhere from somebody who uses traits and tendencies of narcissism. You can be a covert narcissist, you can be an overt narcissist, and all the space in between that. So this is where it becomes really important to have conversations about this and to really start to dive into what this means. So shall I just read through some of these traits here?
Do you want to first, Brad, do you mind giving the overall definition of narcissism or intro to what it is?
Sure. Well, I mean, I kind of threw that first sentence on there because it really grasps it really quite well. Like I'm saying, that pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior. So basically, jumping into that fantasy part of it, a narcissist actually lives in their own reality. They have a very hard time living in the reality that, healthy, common individuals live in. So they really have this, preoccupation with fantasy. Their behaviors can be grandiose, and they have this deep need for admiration and typically have a lack of empathy. So now, I don't know if we'll get to it today, but their empathy, they can display empathy. Sometimes people call narcissists dark empaths. So you get true empaths that are like light empaths that are able to identify with people's emotions and experiences, and actually care about what that person's experience is. Whereas you can have dark empaths, which are more narcissistic, and basically they will use this ability to understand or relate to somebody in a negative or exploitative manner. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of what it's about.
Thank you. So we actually already covers that first sort of trait there, which is a grandiose sense of self-importance. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is kind of the shortened version. But yeah, let's just kind of run through it. So yeah, the grandiose sense of self-importance, which is basically this overinflated sense of self. And really what that's about is trying to feed their self-esteem. And the other big thing that is important to understand about narcissism, everything they do, they have a very delicate self-esteem. So everything they do is an attempt to actually promote or build up their esteem. So, and this is what leads into all the other traits as well. So do you want to keep going with it, Kim, or?
Sure.
Okay.
They have a preoccupation with fantasies. So this is primarily where they might sort of live in this fantasy world where they're speaking about real life things, but not in the most realistic way. Does that help? They believe he or she is special. They require excessive admiration. And that's the key word there, is the excessive admiration. They have a sense of entitlement. They're typically interpersonally exploitative. Let's explain that one a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they will exploit relationship, and it doesn't matter to them if it's a win-win or a win-lose, as long as they're experiencing some level of win. They will do whatever it takes, and typically this is where we talk about the narcissist using other people as a source of supply or a feed for self-esteem. So it doesn't matter what they have to do to get it, right? Whether that's being manipulative, being abusive, being overly loving, whatever it is, this is what they'll use, this interpersonal exploitation to achieve this feed.
Mm-hmm. They lack empathy. So that's a pretty clear one. Jackie, can you make it just a bit smaller? I don't know if anybody else can, but I'm missing a couple off of here. They're often envious of others and perceives others as envious of him or her.
I don't know why I can't move it.
Thanks. Perfect. And they show arrogant or haughty behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So what does everyone think of these traits?
You just want us to throw out comments?
Sure, yeah.
Honestly, when I look at them, I'm like, oh yeah, I've done that. I've done that. I could have done that at some point. Yeah, oh yeah. So I can see myself in definitely like over half of them, to be honest.
Thank you so much, Summer, for saying that. That's so valuable. because I'm certain you're not the only one. This is why we talk about this, because as Brad said at the beginning, we've all experienced at some point or time one, two, maybe all of these in different events or situations in our lives. But that doesn't make somebody a narcissist. What makes them a narcissist is that evasive or that pervasive pattern, right? That it's multiple of these traits consistently.
Can I ask a question? And would you say that, you know, depending on the culture of your family or our culture, if that lends to the excessive swinging of that and the development of that? Because as I'm looking at this in my head, I start to go, okay, interesting. I can start to watch those behaviors and patterns in myself. And I'm kind of curious what the opposite to these patterns is.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just to understand the question, yeah, you're asking what the opposite of kind of narcissistic traits would be.
Yeah, I guess what's the opposite of a narcissist? I guess, yeah, that is my question. Is yeah.
Well, yeah, typically, I mean, we talk about if you want to look at almost like a stark contrast, it would be an empath. Somebody that is, you know, deeply caring, is almost self-negligent in the way that they go about doing things. And ultimately, right, these are the two extremes that we're talking about, right? So that's on the far ends of the spectrum. I would say neither one of those is necessarily healthy. Right? It's nice to have a balance of these things. And it is okay, like I'm talking about, to actually find yourself on this list from time to time, right? I mean, that even healthy individuals will display some of these things. I mean, the one example I like to use is that, you know, the kid on the bike who learns to ride without hands and is like, hey, mom, look at me, right? Is he being a little narcissist, or is he just, you know, excited that he's learned a new skill and wants his mom to see it, right? And wants to share that experience. So, right, does that child require excessive admiration for it? No, but a recognition or some level of admiration or praise would be nice in that type of situation. Right. So, I mean, that is okay. So in the most healthy person, the thing to pay attention to, and if we were to say the healthy version of non-narcissism, is that there isn't an excessive external need for self-esteem, right? Somebody feels full and complete within themselves, and they feel that they can interact and carry healthy relationships without exploiting other people.
Does that help explain that, Summer?
Yeah. I have one more question.
Sure.
You talked about empath. And the word that came up for me was like martyr, if they're excessively not they're self-effacing rather than self-demanding. So is it, how does martyr play into that?
Well, yes. Thank you, Summer. And this actually kind of leads into where we want to go anyways. So this is really helpful. So that kind of martyr idea of, you know, putting other people ahead of yourself at the cost of yourself. So typically we talk about that individual. We have a little spectrum of our own here that we like to teach. And so we call that the one end, the doormat. So the martyr that's like overextends themselves, over accommodates, right, doesn't maintain healthy boundaries for their own personal well-being. So that's typically what we call a doormat.
Well, I like this. We're right jumping right into yeah, this tool. So good.
Mhm.
Did you want to take it to the other end of that spectrum, Brad?
Sure. So now
Is there
on the other end of that spectrum, and typically most empaths will find themselves at that end of the spectrum. They'll find themselves at the doormat end of the spectrum. Whereas on the opposite end is the jerk, or we like to put, stronger language to it so it kind of sinks in and anchors for people, the assholes. The assholes are demanding, demeaning, entitled, and exploitative. So basically, a narcissist, it's fair to say that, for the most part, all narcissists are assholes, but not necessarily all assholes are narcissists. That's one way to say it. So, but now there's a happy medium here, and this is what we call the badass, right? Somebody who is able to stand in their own convictions, is able to treat others kindly and with respect, and is able to uphold boundaries and the well-being of themselves and others. And so that's what we call a badass. So this is why our talk is basically, a badass in a narcissistic world. We don't want to be an asshole. No, neither do we want to be a doormat, because both of those end up crashing and burning in the end. And they're both highly damaging to interpersonal relationships. So yeah, anything else you ladies would add to that?
I think that's really comprehensive. Yeah. So we just look at it as a spectrum of doormat, badass, asshole. And we don't necessarily want to be on either side of that, but we want to be somewhere in the middle where it might flex a little bit at times to towards doormat, or a little bit at sometimes maybe perceived towards asshole. But I think it's the perception that's important there. But it's landing in that badass stance, and it can be really empowering. And there's very specific traits related to what we deem very specific traits related to being a badass.
Mm-hmm. Now, does anybody have any questions around this?
What are your thoughts on the scale? Okay, let's carry on.
I think it's awesome. I'm just going to throw it out there.
I think it's good too. It's a good measure when we're interacting with somebody. So when we're observing behavior, or we're observing ourselves and staying curious about ourselves, because as those who've joined us before, curiosity is something that we talk about a lot. Curious about yourself, or where you're landing in each moment, and how to practice sort of pushing towards badass, depending on where you find yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I'll kind of talk about a certain pattern. So if you find yourself in a relationship with a narcissist, what you will typically do is, initially anyways, if you're used to getting along with people, if you're used to having healthy interactions and healthy relationships with people, you will start slowly kind of compensating for their somewhat extreme behaviors. And the more you start accommodating, like Kim's saying, I mean, in relationship, we have to be flexible, we have to accommodate, but we also have to assert in certain situations. And so we want to stay within that central realm. We don't want to end up way over here or way over here. But ultimately what happens is the narcissist, after they're done what we call love bombing, or after they're done, presenting themselves as the best person in the world, their entitlement leads them to become highly demanding. So when they become highly demanding, this is where they start moving up the scale this way, and we end up trying to maintain balance in the relationship, and we end up going down this way, and we start to over accommodate them. So, and this becomes a very dangerous cycle, because the narcissist is insatiable. It doesn't matter how great you are at accommodating, and how empathetic, caring, well-intentioned you are. You will never be enough for the narcissist's esteem needs. Their esteem is so desperate, it will just consume you. And ultimately, what happens to a dirty doormat at the end of the day? Right? Typically, or maybe at the end of the year or whatever it is, it gets tossed out. So, and this is what we call the discard, the narcissistic discard. So they will use you up, and then they will spit you out.
And when you're in that space of, they're moving towards asshole, so you move a little bit more towards doormat to try to balance and see if, things will come back again. You can find yourself, as much as you give into that, it, as Brad's saying, like they're insatiable. It can feel like a bottomless pit. Like it doesn't, there is no end. You cannot give enough. You'll never be able to top it up. Mm-hmm. And that is what can feel so devastating, because you can feel like you're trying everything that you have and you're giving everything that you have, and it will never satisfy. And
again, building on what Kim is saying here, is if you're used to healthy relationships, you're used to having a sense of, cohesion and unity within those relationships. So you keep working with this person thinking at some point it's got to pay off. At some point they've got to come around. At some point it has to work where this person's going to become reasonable, and you're going to be able to reason with them, and you're going to be able to live with them in a state of unity. And now the other thing with narcissism is it tends to be very on and off, push and pull. And this is what you get with all what we call cluster B personality disorders. So the other personality disorders in this cluster B diagnostic framework are borderline personality disorder, as well as histrionic personality disorder. And you get this push-pull. So the thing is, they really do want love, but at the same time, love is the most scary thing to them. So they'll pull you close and then they'll push you out. They'll pull you close and then they'll push you out. And now the trick with narcissism is they don't want to be, their esteem needs don't allow them to truly absorb love. They end up wanting to be worshipped rather than loved. And so if you don't take on that excessive admiration, worship of them, they start to devalue you. And they devalue you before the discard. But if you're a really good source, they devalue you, they build you back up because they want to consume more of you. They devalue you, build you back up to consume more. And then all of a sudden you start seeing your own mood fluctuating significantly as well.
Is this also that, like you're talking about, that they constantly sort of move the goalpost? So you have this imaginary, like, oh, if you just give this extra amount, then they can, then your relationship will be better. And then you get there and that's not where it was to begin with.
Exactly. And it's just never good enough. And now here's the paradoxical thing about it. You can become the perfect person, partner, child, sister, mother, whatever role you're playing in that narcissistic relationship. You can become the perfect version, but the more you work at being better for the narcissist, the more frantic they get, because they can no longer point the finger at you as the bad guy, and they have to maintain this sense of their perfection. So if they no longer have a finger to point when their self-esteem is low, or when they're being demanding and that type of thing, they don't know where to turn. And so then at that point, they become highly provocative in terms of they provoke. They become highly provoking. And they will push every single button to try to get you to stoop to a lower level. So this is what I call the spirit of narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
It lives in a dark pit and it wants to drag you down into that pit. It wants you to stoop. And I've actually heard narcissists say that they intentionally press the buttons of the other people to get them to react strongly so that they don't look like the crazy ones in the situation.
Can you explain, Brad, what stooping means?
Sure, yes. Stooping means, basically getting pulled down to that level. So, and here's the thing about narcissism. Unless you're a narcissist yourself, you will always lose when you try to play their game. So if you try to meet them on their turf, they have the home field advantage and they will destroy you, right? Unless you have the narcissistic spirit, do not go there with them. And they will try to pull you down. They will definitely do that. Now, one thing that Kim and Jackie, I'm sure, have heard me say 1,000 times at this time is, you don't know how to deal with something until you know what you're dealing with. And so when you're able to identify the narcissistic spirit, then you're able to step up to it as a badass. And then you can become the badass in that narcissistic space. So whether you're dealing with an individual who's a narcissist or you're dealing with a system that's narcissistic, like a work environment, or, dare I say it, a governmental environment or anything like that, you now know what type of spirit you're dealing with. And when you know what you're dealing with, you can start to figure out the most healthy ways to deal with it.
I think that's such an impactful sentence, right? You don't know how to deal with something until you know what you're dealing with. That can change everything.
Mm-hmm.
So how are people feeling about the information so far?
Good. I have a question.
Yeah.
Sure.
So when you're dealing with a narcissist or say a work situation, do you have some powerful phrases that you could use to de-energize them or anything like that?
Sure. So basically, I'll start out like this. So rather than kind of script this whole thing, it's nice to kind of have principles and understandings that you can work from, and then kind of use your own personal style from that point forward. So yeah, to try to use certain scriptings is difficult to do. But for you to understand the principles. Now, here is one really, really important principle. Nobody wins in a narcissistic framework. Nobody. So ultimately, you're dealing with a less than ideal situation. So you're not dealing with the ideal. Now, in a healthy relationship, we constantly work towards an ideal resolve. And typically, we're able to get there when you have two people working together to create an ideal outcome. But when you're dealing with somebody that has no interest of creating an ideal outcome, you're dealing with that less than ideal. The ladder doesn't go all the way up. And this is why we end up ruminating, thinking of, oh, if I just try this way, or if I just try that way, or if I just try this way, maybe we can get it to that ideal resolve point. And we keep doing that, and we spin our wheels, and we just start banging our heads against the wall, and oftentimes start doubting ourselves. So to realize that it's a less than situation, it's really useful, because you're no longer then fighting for the ideal, it's not what is the best thing I can do in this situation. It's basically what is the least worst thing I can do in this situation. And sometimes the least worst thing to do in a situation is walk away. Or the least worst thing is to just repeat what you said or ask that question that they're trying to avoid again, or, you know, those types of things. So the first element that you really want to pay attention to is, okay, what is the least worst thing I can do in this situation? That's the first question you want to ask yourself. So is saying something to them, you know, the least worst thing you can do? In some situations, you know, I often say, do not negotiate with terrorists. Don't even try to have a conversation with a narcissist who is in their deep reactive state. And this is something we understand through the research too, is they can be in deep reactive states where they're rooted deep into their narcissism. And you're basically dealing with like an animal with no concept of empathy or anybody else. They're backed into a corner and they're just going to scrap with you. So yeah, what's the least worst thing to do when you have a wild animal backed into a corner? Hold them there and try to yell at them and reason with them, or maybe take a break and see if that narcissistic energy can come down.
And depending, because, you know, part of why, you know, there's not really a script for this is because narcissists are a bit tricky and they're great at pivoting, and depending on their style, their history, personality, it can look a little different, right, in terms of how they'll strategize around using those traits. So this is actually a really great lead in, Berna, so thank you for that question, because we're going to go, Brad's already started, going right into sort of what are those traits that we want to embody as a badass so that we can deal with a narcissist. It's sort of challenging language around that. I was like, manage, deal with, interact with. It is a little bit of playing the game there. So yeah, so let's jump into that. So as Brad already talked about, it's sort of recognizing this sort of less than ideal situation, that there is no win, and really letting that land can be a little bit challenging, I think, right? This idea that particularly if you are a highly empathetic person and you want to resolve a thing, understanding that there is no resolution that's going to keep both parties happy, can be a challenging piece of information to swallow. Yeah, so now let's move on to some other things. What about boundaries? So boundaries is a really big one. Now, we want to sort of define a little bit of what a healthy boundary looks like. Because people can say they have boundaries and sometimes they're just drawing hard lines and it's not really what we would term as a healthy boundary. So some of those components of a healthy boundary might be that it doesn't demean or diminish the other person or yourself. Boundaries are typically not flexible. If it's a boundary for you, it is a boundary, and it doesn't flex in situations or with different people. Boundaries can feel or are intended to feel safe for all. So meaning I have a boundary about this, that it doesn't cross typically somebody else's line. Yeah. What are some other traits we want to add under boundaries?
One comment I was going to make is, I believe we've talked about this before, is that setting boundaries actually is really challenging for an empath, because it can be perceived as being unloving when you're setting a boundary in a relationship where normally an empath is used to being a doormat and to kind of giving in. And that is perceived to the empath as being loving. And when you start setting boundaries for yourself, even though it's protecting yourself to keep you safe, it may feel like you're not sharing the same amount of love when really that is the opposite of what's happening.
That's an excellent point, Jackie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, typically when you're in that doormat space, to move up into that healthy boundary badass territory, you're going to feel like the biggest jerk in the world. And oftentimes, we carry this commitment not to be a jerk. And ultimately that leads to us sometimes feeling guilty for upholding those boundaries. And guilt can be one of those things that pushes us back down the line to become a doormat again.
Yeah.
So yeah, where we feel that we're putting other people out in some way. Now, I'm just going to jump into it really quick here. There's a big distinction between being nice and being kind. Kindness is based on truth and truth telling. So for instance, I'm going to use an example here. I don't know, I might get beat up for saying it, but yeah, you know, let's say a wife asks her husband, hey, how do I look in this outfit? Right now, if the husband's being nice and it's not his favorite outfit, right, he basically says, oh, honey, you look great. And, you know, but then she kind of sits there and wonders, oh, is he just saying it or whatever, right? Now, if he truly doesn't like the outfit, what he should be saying in true kindness is he should say, well, you make the outfit look good. However, it's definitely not one of my favorite. I think others look way better on you than that, right? And that would be true kindness. Now, it doesn't come across as very nice, but it truly is kind because it's based in truth. So a lot of people think that, you know, nice equals kind, but that is not the case. Kind can be very, very harsh sometimes. So, but nice is always nice, right? Even though it's not truthful.
But kind information might, it might sound harsh, but it's not said harshly and it's not intended to be harsh. It is just intended for truth, right? If you ask a question, don't you want a truthful answer? Or do you want a nice answer?
Yeah.
Dan's shaking his head over there. Yeah.
Well, it's the whole notion of, you know, kiss me with a lie or, you know, punch me with the truth type thing. And, you know, some people will actually say, no, I would rather the person be nice to me than kind to me, right? If that's what it is, I'd rather be kissed with a lie than punched by the truth. But then again, if that's the category that you fall into, then you're not living in touch with reality. And, you know, that pushes you more into this alternate realm where the narcissist likes to exist. So, yeah. So now I hope this is making sense. I like how you categorize boundaries there, Kim. I think that's really good. Does that make sense to everybody? Are there any questions around boundaries?
I have a question.
Oh,
So
sure.
you've talked about how narcissists they attack and then they like to build you up and then they attack. And so if you're trying to be a badass and you're setting boundaries and there's been a negative incident that happens and then it's not really addressed, it's like they move on, but you haven't necessarily moved on. And then their next interaction is like this super sweet, fake, whatever. How do you go, because you're like, it's a lose-lose always in their world. So how do you go about still upholding boundaries and being okay yourself? And not just going back into this nicety game.
Right, right. Well, yeah, they tend to be more comfortable with the circus animals than we do. So, right, the elephant in the room, so to speak, or the monkey on your back. So there can still be an elephant in the room, or you can be carrying a monkey on your back, and the next moment they may flip and try to draw you back in a certain way where it's disregarding this big elephant in the room, or that thing that feels it's unresolved. Am I catching what you're saying here, Jen?
Yes.
Okay. So then, yeah, the question is, what are you supposed to do when they just want to ignore the circus animals and they just want to go on as though nothing happened? Is that what you're getting at?
Right. And a boundary has been set, and it's like, well, this behavior is not okay with me. And then it's like, well, everything's a-okay now. And it's like, well, no, it's not. You've just been an asshole, and now I'm supposed to be lovey. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Right. So that's the way it is, right? Because if you're honoring yourself, it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you get to take the monkey off your back and set it in the middle of the room for poof, it to become the elephant in the room again, right? But then you have to be careful, because they're going to say, oh, you're never satisfied. You're always trying to sabotage our relationship, right? This is the language that they try to use. And you're like, actually, no, I'm just trying to continue a conversation or find resolve on this. Now, the thing is, if they aren't interested in working with you towards resolve, this is where it becomes the lose-lose situation, because you're stuck in a double bind. Because if you continue to pursue it, they're either going to stonewall you or they're going to provoke you into, so if they stonewall you, it's basically passive-aggressive behavior. I'm not talking about this right now. And they walk away, and they'll never want to bring it up again, because if they have to take any responsibility or be held accountable in any way for their actions, if they aren't perfect actions, they're not interested. They're interested if they can flip it around and blame you. And typically, as healthy individuals, what we're able to do is take responsibility and be accountable for our actions. And we will take ownership of that. And then they go, see, it was you, right? So what they're doing is, so let me draw this out really, really quick. Hopefully it comes across on the screen here.
It's such a great example, Jen, because they're also in that situation. It's an attempt to kind of push you to be the asshole, or to make you feel like you're being the asshole, when really you're just embodying that badass boundary place. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
See, yeah, Kim, that's a really good point. That is being a badass, holding somebody to continuing a conversation, an adult conversation, right? Adult to adult, is really important. Now, I don't know if this is going to come through, but
Yeah.
Okay. So this is interaction. As you can see over here, here's one individual, here's another individual. Actions plus actions equals interaction. So the thing is, let's say you contributed your share to this, they contributed their share to this. If you say, you're right, yeah, no, I take ownership for this, what they want to do is they want to throw this whole interaction onto you, even though you can only take a portion of it. You're only responsible for a portion of it. And so they want to put the full blame onto you and say, see, you're the one responsible for it, without taking their own stuff. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So at what point do you go, like, what's the point of beating your head against the wall? Like, do you just then carry on and just let it go instead of the fight?
Well, okay, now Kim and Jackie and I had this conversation the other day, and we recorded it. And it's what we call, you can't reason with the unreasonable. And so this is what we expect when we're used to healthy relationships, and you can reason with somebody. You keep bringing reason to the table, and you try to bring it to the table in different ways so that they can understand, or that you can come to a mutual understanding on something, or at least even agree to disagree. So the thing is, you'll keep trying. And the thing is, when they have no interest in getting to that resolve with you, the true reality is you're not getting it, right? You will never get that resolve on that issue. You will never get them to take ownership for their stuff, which ironically disempowers them. Because when somebody doesn't own their stuff, they disempower themselves. They give their power away, right? Because they're no longer owning their actions. So they don't carry any sense of personal agency, which is why they then have to go out and consume supply from other people to get a sense of power and control. So it becomes this really negative feedback loop. So ultimately, though, to answer your question, it's like, well, you just can't reason with the unreasonable. So now we're into that less than ideal space. So what's the least worst thing you can do in that situation? So if somebody doesn't care to resolve that issue with you, do you just say, okay, fine, I'm not going to get resolve on that, but I want to live in some level of unity with this person, so I'm just going to let it go, right? Just letting it go may be the least worst thing that you can do. But it's unsustainable. If that happens over and over and over and over again, you don't have a relationship. Right? It's just an accommodation is all it is. So at that point, it's just facing the reality of, okay, I don't have a relationship. What am I supposed to do in this situation? And then again, you have to just look at your options, like your less than options. And are you okay living according to those less than options? Or do you have to say, no, this is a deal breaker for me. I'm not going to keep doing this.
I was also going to say, in my experience, and I think we might have talked about this before, it is quite common to have an argument or a fight or a disagreement, and for the narcissist to pretend like nothing happened the next day, and for things to be really rosy and lovely. And it's almost like that way of drawing you back in again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they play your sense of responsibility against you, and they'll pull the passive aggressive thing, and they won't love bomb you. They will stonewall you and play the silent treatment until you beg to have some semblance of, reconnection. So, yeah. So either typically one of those two things will happen.
With the so I was brought up in a narcissistic household, and I still find like the boundary thing is really challenging for me. Every time I would just even stand up for myself a little bit when I was younger, I was completely shamed. I was told I was angry, arrogant, selfish. And then, so as I've been working on this quite diligently for 4 years, but I still find the boundaries. I find the boundaries is actually a really good repellent. because even like setting the smallest one, if you can keep the smallest one, there's still that's still not going to be cool. Like they'll still sort of take off. But I do find like it's so back and forth with me. Like it's like I feel like I'm playing tennis, since the narcissist plays them short and then long and then short. Like is it just the like you just continuous practice? Is there a like a tip or a hint, or is that just what it is?
Sure. Well, yeah, I'll throw something out there here. You have to understand how that's playing on you, how that is working on you. So when it comes to the guilt or the shame, now this is what most people don't understand. Guilt and shame are actually some of our greatest allies. And so what we try to do, though, is we try to erase the uncomfortable experience of guilt and shame. Rather than what does this guilt and shame tell me? So if we go into the guilt or shame, it can help us identify what is ours to own and what isn't ours to own. And especially when you're brought up in a narcissistic household, it gets so confused, and you will feel shame for something rightfully you have no reason to feel shame about. But because of the way that it's framed and the way that you're gaslit all the time, I mean, right? So this is where you want to follow guilt and shame in. Okay, I feel guilty about this, or I feel ashamed of this. You can go in and you can say, is that a true shame? Is it, because true shame is not acting in alignment with who you truly are. Mm-hmm. And so true shame, when you go in and you haven't acted in alignment with who you truly are, well, then you get to take ownership of that and go, okay, I want to act more in alignment with who I am. How am I going to go about doing that? So then shame becomes your ally in that sense. Or you go in and you're like, well, I'm feeling shameful about what this other person did or said, but if they did or said that thing, you can't take responsibility for it. You have to give that back to them in your own psyche and your own spirit, and recognize that that's not yours to own, that's theirs.
Gillian, there's a couple things, if I may, that stood out to me there as well. As well, I'm going to start with sort of what you were talking about, Brad. And one of the things that you may hear us say if you come to any other workshops is that do not rob yourself or somebody else of the opportunity of discomfort. Mm-hmm. Right? So when there's discomfort for ourselves, there's information there, as Brad was talking about. So lean into that. And also, when other people are uncomfortable, you don't have to rescue them from that. It's an opportunity to support. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other piece I wanted to address there too with you, Gillian, is it possible that when you're standing in that badass framework, narcissists are really great at pivoting to try to get the empathic person they're in a relationship with to shift? Is it possible that that's what's happening there, that you are actually embodying that badass and those boundaries, and what you're witnessing is just the flexing on the narcissist part? And so then it sort of, again, we sort of pull that back to ourselves to be like, oh, I'm not holding the boundary because it's not maybe getting the result that I want, but it might be because you just keep seeing the pivot and pivot and pivot from the narcissist. Mm-hmm. Just something to consider.
Yeah. Okay.
When you're tracking that. Okay. We've got another big one for you under this.
Can
yes.
I put you on pause?
Yeah.
Will you be able to hold that thought?
Yeah, I've got it.
Okay, perfect. Jen, I was answering one of your questions. I want to just make sure that that kind of got rounded out for you.
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, Kim.
Okay, our next tip or tool, piece of information for you is about truth and hope. And this one I think is really important as well to be able to recognize. And we'll give, Brad all the credit on the analogy for this. So I'll let you share it because it's just so beautiful. How truth and hope work together.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, well, I mean, it was kind of off the cuff in our previous conversation, but basically, within a narcissistic framework, hope becomes very, very dangerous. And so, because when we lead with hope, it puts us in a vulnerable place because a narcissist is able to get into that space, understand what our hopes are, and actually become or embody at some level our hopes. And so then once they're in that space, they can really mess around with things and basically just shatter our hopes. So rather than letting hope lead in situations with a narcissist, we have to pair it with truth. And so I talk about hope being the cart and truth being the horse, and you can't get the cart before the horse. You have to let truth lead. And so, Jen, what you were talking about there, what happens if you just can't get through to the narcissist? What happens if they just aren't interested? Well, instantly you can see your hopes aren't being fulfilled. So if you lead with that hope, you're going to feel burnt at the end of the day. But if you lead with, it's still going to be painful, but if you lead with truth, truth will inform you that this is what you're actually dealing with. You're dealing with one of those less than situations, so you're going to have to choose a less than option within that circumstance. So then you kind of put hope behind truth and let hope only climb as far as truth is able to carry it. So, yeah, and then I like to say sometimes truth with the narcissist acts like a donkey, and it is a stubborn mule and it doesn't want to go anywhere, even though you want to be in this nice meadow celebrating life and sharing life with this person. The truth that narcissist carries or holds you back to is acting like a mule that's just stuck on a dusty, dirty road that just doesn't want to go right to that beautiful place. So, yeah, I hope that captures it.
Yeah, I really love the analogy of letting truth lead. So sort of the truth mule and the hope cart. Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Go ahead.
In healthy relationship, it is a valiant steed, right? It's a valiant horse that's able to get you to that beautiful place of shared experience. So, but yeah, in a narcissistic relationship, typically it is that jackass mule is what it is.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really valuable to recognize that when you're in a situation, to be able to put it through that filter of what happened here was truth leading or was hope leading, and how do I want to see this situation? What is the truth of it? What it does is it roots the badass in reality, particularly when the narcissist spends so much time in fantasy. And we want our feet in reality.
And that's a really good point, Kim. So ultimately what happens if you're trying to reason with the unreasonable, you may be bringing all of these truths about reality to try to get that truth moving forward. But the thing is, the narcissist, when they're in their fantasy and they're living in their altered reality, they will actually be highly offended and feel violated by the truth rooted in reality. And they will fight you on it, and they will throw it back in your face, and you will feel like you're going crazy, because how can they just not see this truth? How can I not get this through to them? Right? It's simple. It's right there. It could literally be as, simple as 2 + 2 = 4. And they will sit there and go, no, 2 + 2 = whatever their reality says 2 + 2 =. Mm-hmm.
Any questions from anyone? Comments? Thoughts? How is this information landing?
Good.
Thanks, Gillian.
Yeah, we're definitely throwing a lot of information at you. So if we're running too far ahead, just slow us down.
We really only have about 2 more things, and then we have a little, surprise at the end. So I guess we'll move on to the next. Yeah.
I have a question about like hope. When you say hope leading or truth leading, what is the difference of those?
Sure. So, well, with hope, hope is basically like our dreams, our ideals, for lack of a better way to say it, the things that we truly hope for, long for, desire. And so we can step into a circumstance or relationship with that leading the way. And a narcissist will be able to grab onto that, and they will morph themselves initially, if you're a good source of esteem for them, they will initially morph into that hope space to get you hooked in. And you will believe that you won't believe your luck. Right? So I hope that explains hope. Whereas truth, right, if we take a big step back and look at the narcissistic relationship, you start to realize that you're having great moments. I call them heavenly moments with the narcissist, and then pure hell with the narcissist. And there's very rarely is there any in between with them. You're either like in bliss or like you're just being obliterated.
Okay, thanks.
One point I wanted to make, we didn't, just kind of circling back, that's coming up, is that being a badass is going to look and feel very different in a romantic relationship versus a family relationship versus a work relationship. And they're going to have different implications as well.
That's a great point, Jackie.
Yeah. So even though the basis of the boundaries and the principles and everything like that are similar, it is going to look different in each context. Is this what you're getting at, Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what we were talking about last week. Holding a boundary within a family, like holding a boundary within a romantic relationship might end up in resulting in that relationship is done, which is painful in itself, but it can kind of have a different, cleaner break. Whereas within a family dynamic, holding those boundaries may mean ultimately not having a relationship with that family member anymore, which has different long-term impacts and can impact other relationships within that family too. So that can make it more challenging to hold boundaries.
Yes, at the family level, dealing with narcissism at the family level, like Jackie is saying, I will just reconfirm that. Right, it's very different because oftentimes there is the expectation or the pressure that there's going to be ongoing interaction or attempted relationship along the way.
And it will, if a relationship does maintain within the family dynamic, it will, that dynamic will look different, and it can often take an extended period of time to change, which means the person changing the boundary, holding the boundary, has to be really diligent about holding that for extended periods of time. And there, you know, we will have we'll have a talk available for you soon to actually listen to more about specifically about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So something else that might help here too is talking about trust, and specifically informed trust within a relationship. So how do we define informed trust? Brad?
Well, we can say what it isn't, right? Informed trust isn't blind trust. So, because again, blind trust can get us into trouble. If we just, now, of course, if we're running into a reasonable, healthy individual, it's okay to put trust into them. However, we do want to be, what's the term we use here, Kim? We want to be more skeptical. That doesn't mean critical, but a little bit more skeptical, especially if we're empaths, towards new relationships or even existing relationships that that we feel are draining us or beating us down in some way. So then at that point, we want to go with, rather than that blind trust thing, just giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, we want to be able to say, well, no, I'm going to enter with a little bit of doubt. I'm going to enter with a lens of discernment. And now here's the thing. Narcissists will use the term, you're so judgmental. Well, you know, and that somehow is a bad thing. Well, if it's a discerning judgment, it's actually going to serve you very, very well. So to go into a situation or into a relationship with informed trust, that's trust built on proof that this person cares for your well-being, proof that this person is genuinely interested in understanding you, proof that this person can be empathetic, kind, loving, etc., etc.
Another way to look at that too is, I think most people have had the experience of sensing or having an initial sort of idea of who this person is. And then we're looking for the alignment of that. Like, is there a consistent alignment from what's under the surface to what is actually being expressed and actioned? Right? Are those two in alignment consistently? Right? So sometimes we can get this sense of misalignment, like, this person's saying all of the right things, or, behaving in all of the right way. I can't find anything that's, is sort of standing out to me and that external expression of who they are. But we're a little hesitant. There's something that's sort of sitting there is like, I don't know why I feel a little hesitant. That might be something to be curious about. Maybe it is your own stuff. Maybe it is that person just in the day, in that moment, something else is going on for them. But if you're sensing that or having that experience, just test it out over time so that you can test that alignment, right? So it's the same, just another way of putting that sort of discernment or skepticism, another way of packaging that.
So that is so well said, Kim. Thank you. I want to make sure that's landing for everybody. Because Kim, am I picking that up right? You're talking about that sense of intuition that you kind of pick up, and how in alignment are their behaviors and their words. And if you get any sense that there's an inconsistency, you really want to pay attention to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like the point about if you're feeling drained by a relationship too. to check that, right? And that's partly your intuition or your gut telling you something, right? So are there actions? What are the behaviors that are actually creating that emotional drainage or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. And then that's where we could talk about what we call psychological or as well as emotional load that you may be carrying within that relationship, right? Where you're carrying the burden of that. So I can say from my personal experience with my ex that I would say the relationship lasted the years that it did because of the psychological and emotional burden that I bared during that time. So you're right, Jen, paying attention to that type of stuff in and of itself. Like Gillian, you touched on here as well, guilt and shame. That's really, really important. And I like how Kim said it succinctly there too, to really don't steal somebody else's richness of discomfort. Is that how you say it, Kim?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. So definitely confirming what you're saying there, Jen. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about that realm or that center kind of driveway where, neither a doormat or a narcissist, but a badass? I think I went from dating an extreme narcissist to a doormat and I think maybe it was trauma, like just always giving too much of themselves, which I saw and didn't encourage. I was like, no, that's not a good plan. And so how many people are too traumatized to speak the truth? And then now that I see the condition of our world, I'm really questioning how many people are in that driveway or even have the capacity to be there, because they're a narcissist or self-absorbed, or if they've been so traumatized that they're a doormat and they can't speak the truth because they're too afraid. And I don't know what the question is. Like, what percentage of people do you actually think are moving towards or able to stay in that kind of driveway?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of narcissism?
No, of the in-between of being able to speak the truth, to be kind and actually speak the truth.
Yes, I see Jackie smiling over there.
Well, I think we've talked about this, that I think it is extremely challenging, Summer, because we are living in this neo-narcissistic world, which is a term Brad has come up with, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit. But our society has created so much narcissism within our culture that we're either narcissists or we're doormats. So finding a way to move into being a badass, it's not trained. We don't know how to do it. We're not teaching our children how to do it. We don't know how to speak the truth because narcissists don't like to hear the truth. So we're taught how to just be nice, to kind of to stay safe and to not create, this perceived, create any sort of duality, I guess would be the comment I would say, and to stay safe. So I don't know if many people do have the capacity to be a badass. It's all within us. We can do it. It's just learning how to flex that muscle.
Yeah, so well said. And yeah, I agree with Jackie. And Summer, you're touching on it here too, right? This polarization of our culture right now. And it goes beyond political. It's relational. It's a pervasive trend that we're seeing more and more. So yeah, this is why we've started calling it like the new narcissism, neo-narcissism, where it's not just an individual thing, but it's like a societal or a systemic thing as well. And then we've all become familiar with the concept of comorbidity with, COVID. And that's the idea that there's other illnesses that go alongside it. This is another component of neonarcissism. You don't just get straight narcissism anymore. You get like multiple personalities, you get mood disorders, you get all of these things piled on top of and contributing to narcissism at the same time. So it makes it even more complex and difficult of an animal. So now you're asking the question, Summer, like, how many people are able to do that? Well, the question is, how many people are able to endure, stepping out, and as Brene Brown talks about in her one book, being in the arena and putting themselves in that vulnerable spot to be beat up, basically. But as a badass, when you realize what you're dealing with, you don't have to personalize it, because you don't have to identify with whatever that narcissistic realm is throwing at you. You become a little bit more protected from that, because you realize that that's a narcissistic wound or a narcissistic reaction from outside of you, right? And so for you to stand firm in your conviction on something, you're definitely putting yourself in the arena. And there aren't a lot of people willing to do that right now because of how polarized and charged society is.
It would seem to me, and I'm going out a limb here, that Canadians are maybe nicer than a lot of countries.
Nice.
Nice, yes, nice. That is what we will agree with that. But yeah, I mean, we're even seeing it in Canada, right? We're seeing a lot more polarization. I recently had a conversation with a friend and realized, okay, we're standing in strong convictions, maybe not really in the center space, maybe more on the peripheral regarding this one issue. And so, it's kind of like, how do you navigate that? How do you come to this mutual understanding in the middle where you can respect where the other person is coming from? And ultimately, I ended up in that relationship or in that circumstance, in that relationship, saying, I actually respect the position where that individual was standing. I'm just not going to stand in that same position, but I can respect entirely where they come from and why they're coming from that position. And that's the health of it. Now, there is one other component as we're touching on this. One way to identify a narcissist is to seek understanding. So, right, the most healthy way to communicate is first seek understanding and then be understood. One way to identify a narcissist is to seek understanding. And as you go down the levels, if all of a sudden they shut the door and run away, you're most likely dealing with a narcissist. Or somebody on that personality spectrum, disorder spectrum, because healthy individuals love to be understood. Healthy individuals love it when you take the time to sit with them and truly understand them and empathize with them. Whereas a narcissist, when you go to that territory with them, it becomes too vulnerable and they bolt, or they react, or they gaslight, or they spin and try to get out of that discussion. And even though you're doing the most healthy thing, they aren't willing to participate with you.
It's kind of like cornering that animal again, right? Mm-hmm. They can attack, it might look different. Yeah. So,
and even though your
really
intent is in the best place.
Yeah, when we're really seen and understood, we feel validated, we feel loved, We feel cared for. We're in a safe space. When you try to give that to a narcissist, or provide that opportunity for a narcissist, they can't go there, right? That's not even really a possibility. They will shut you down at every corner. So it's a really great test, right? If you just are trying to, like, just genuinely from your heart trying to understand, and they are pivoting, they're gaslighting, they're attacking, they're running away, whatever that might look like, then you're probably onto something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe test it again, right? Like, put things through a couple tests, because it might just be that day, or it might have triggered something, or, you don't know. But don't need to test that out for too long before you'll really know.
Can I ask, like, is there different, with teenagers specifically, do they come in and out of different parts of narcissism or different things like that? Like, is that part of, like, are we just dealing with adolescents that have never grown up in part, or?
Yeah, well, essentially, yes. Narcissists are undeveloped. They're actually emotionally and relationally disabled.
Yeah.
And so you'll see them as being emotionally stunted or relationally stunted. And so ultimately, yes, it doesn't matter how old they get chronologically. If they haven't healed and dealt with the wounds that triggered the narcissism in the first place, you're absolutely right. You're dealing with a disabled person emotionally and relationally. Yeah. So, yeah, no, Jackie, I'm noticing the time here. Are there any other questions before we move on to the next thing here? Yeah, Summer, did that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, we have one final thing for you. We are, Brad and Jackie and I are very excited to announce that in the new year, we will have a lot more information available for you on narcissism, all things narcissism, and it will be at your disposal whenever you feel you need the support. And so what that looks like is we have started a podcast. We've recorded a podcast, and it is the Neonarcissism podcast. And that will be launching in the new year. So if you'd like more information on that, maybe just drop us a line on email. We can add you to our MailChimp and make sure that we notify you on that launch date. And just to give you a little preview, we have a trailer for you we'd like to show you now.
Yeah, this is a trailer from our first podcast recording. We have a number of podcasts episodes that we will be releasing in the new year. So,
Okay, let's see. It's dramatic.
Welcome to the Neonarcissism podcast, hosted by emotional intelligence specialists Kim and Jackie of Element Q, alongside strategic psychotherapist Brad Kaufman.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Rise of the Neonarcissism podcast. My name is Kim. I'm sitting here with Jackie, and Jackie and I have a company called Element Q, and we support people with emotional intelligence education and training. And we have partnered with Brad Kaufman, who is a psychotherapist, and he's our strategic partner for this. So we are excited, and we are here to talk all things narcissism, in particular, redefining it to this new version of narcissism that we're all seeing emerge, that we're terming as neo-narcissism.
yes, and by neo-narcissism, we mean the new narcissism. And like Kim's talking about, the narcissism that seems to be emerging at this other level
in society. We're going to get to the bottom of what narcissism in and of itself is, and then, of course, talk a little bit more about neo-narcissism.
Yeah, so it's big. There's a lot to talk about.
If you're like any of us, most likely at some point in your life, you've experienced or run into a narcissist. When you're impacted by narcissism, it does take quite a toll on you mentally and emotionally. And we could even say physically, spiritually, socially, financially. I mean, we can just go down the whole list.
In every way.
In every way.
I think that's really the reason why we're doing this. Our personal stories with narcissism is what's motivating us to try to share this information to help others impacted by it.
Like you're saying, Jackie, that's another reason why we're doing this podcast, is so that we can help get the information out there. And there's a lot of people doing this good work right now, but we feel the more the merrier in this space. So that's definitely why we're doing it, to help people identify it, get out of the abusive trends or the abusive cycles, as well as heal from the abuse too. Maybe some people are struggling with narcissism in and of themselves and don't actually realize that this is what's happening, and this is why their relationships crash and burn over time, or why they cycle through people the way that they do. So this might be informative for those that have the traits of narcissism as well.
Yeah.
So that's the trailer for the first episode of the Neonarcissism podcast. And we really hope everybody tunes in once we have that launched. We have a lot more information. We delve into each of those traits. We share some personal stories, and then we talk about all different topics around narcissism. So we're really hoping that's going to be a supportive resource for everybody. Any final, we're right at time here. So any final comments, questions, thoughts? Well, we very much appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. We're hoping that the information that you received tonight, there's something or multiple things that have landed and that you can really take forward with you. And as always, if we do coaching sessions, so if you'd like, you can reach out to us. We can arrange that. Or if you have any questions, you can drop us a line, and we're happy to answer it through that way as well. Okay. Yes, question, hands up.
I do have one question. So,
sure.
Does a narcissist ever question whether or not they're a narcissist? Or can they? Like...
Well, I think that depends on where on the scale they might land.
Okay.
Right? I think some people, I'll get you to weigh in on this as well, Brad. I think some people who have a habit of using narcissistic traits may be able to see it in themselves if it's, if they're listening to the podcast, for instance, and be like, this is all feeling a little too familiar. Or, yes. But if they're sort of further down the scale of like a narcissistic personality disorder, I would suspect they're blissfully unaware.
Yes. And that's typically where you'll find a full-blown narcissistic personality disordered person is on that far end of the scale. They really have this idealistic view of themselves. And they can't take accountability for anything, because if they did recognize themselves as carrying these narcissistic traits, it means that they would have to do some work, which means that may lead them into a realm of discomfort. And they're all about keeping life as comfortable as possible. And really, they do need to control their environment around them to keep themselves comfortable, and they also have to carry that positive narrative of self as well. So it is rare And yes, we now are kind of looking at this. It's not referenced this way within the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. However, as clinicians, we do look at it as more of a spectrum disorder, where you can get, you know, people that are subtly on it and those that are kind of full blown. But yeah, to basically answer your question, like Kim is saying, depends where they are in the scale. But ultimately at the extreme end of it, yeah, they typically won't look at themselves, even if they're offered the information.
So, okay, so an extreme narcissist would know they're an asshole, but look, they wouldn't mind that.
Well, yeah, and no, they won't mind it. Like, actually, there's a little bit of a difference. So in the psychological literature, we talk about it being a grandiose narcissist, which in common terms is known as an overt narcissist. You know, one of those like over the top people, you walk in a room, they're demanding attention. If you ask, like, they'll actually brag about being narcissists, right? Those ones are a lot easier. It's like, okay, you can see the stamp on their forehead that I want to stay clear of this person. This is bad news, right? That's a grandiose narcissist. But then in the literature, we talk about vulnerable narcissists, which in common terms is usually referred to as a covert narcissist. These are the masters of illusion. And so, yeah, even they fool themselves. They lie most to themselves. So they aren't going to be the ones stepping up and taking responsibility and going, oh, I have, you know, some work to do on myself here for self-development. And they don't realize that even though they cycle through relationship after relationship and burn bridges and cycle through people and use them up, spit them out, use them up, spit them out, even though that's their pattern, they won't recognize it. They will blame everybody else, even though they're the common denominator. So you'll get the grandiose narcissist that will be like, yeah, I'm a narcissist and I don't care, right? Like one guy like that would be like a Robert Downey Jr., right? At least the way he presents himself in public discourse, you would call him a grandiose narcissist. And he doesn't care. Right? If you went to his face and you said, you're such a narcissist, he'd be like, oh, thank you, you know, and he'd walk out the door with a smile on his face. Whereas a covert narcissist would be so highly offended and wounded by you saying that. And if you're dealing with a covert narcissist, I encourage you all never to call them on it, because that just gets disastrous. Just recognize what you're dealing with. You remain covert about it, and then that's where you can start responding in more healthy ways. And they'll get confused as to why you aren't reacting in the way that you would typically react, why you aren't being manipulated or easily manipulated in the same way that you used to be easily manipulated. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We so appreciate your participation. I think, you know, we had a really great time hosting this for you and sharing this information, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for participating. And if you find value in this, please, by all means, check out our podcast and share it with others. We want to help out as much as we possibly can. And I mean, there's already a lot of people doing good work on podcasts and YouTube in this area, but the more voices, the merrier, the more perspectives that we can share, the better. So yes, of course, if you find value in this in the new year, definitely let friends and family know about, you know, the free resources that we're looking to offer.
Do we tell all our narcissistic friends too?
We'll see what happens.
So I do have a question.
Yes.
In order to get on the link for the podcast, where would I go? I actually just clicked this link, and so I'm not actually sure where to go for being informed.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So right now we haven't gone live with it yet. We aren't going live until the new year. But like Jackie and Kim were saying, just fire us an email and then we can add you to the contact list, and we can make sure that you're sent the links.
Right. Okay. So which email would it be? Like Element Q, or do you have a group email for the three of you?
Yes and yes. So yeah, you can contact info@elementq.ca. Did I get that right, ladies?
Yeah.
And then, or you can email the Neonarcissism podcast at gmail.com.
Okay.
So either one of those works.
Okay, awesome. And I just wanted to say this was absolutely brilliantly informative. Like, you used clear language. It was, and the examples were like, you could not get this. Like, it was just like, oh my goodness. It was fantastic. I just don't have words. It was so great. I loved the language. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that.
Yeah,
I put the emails in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
awesome.
Okay. Well, again, thanks everybody.
Night, night.
Lovely to
thank
connect
you.
with you all.
Thank you. That was really great.
Thank
Look
you
forward
so
to
much.
reconnecting in January.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Right.
Merry Christmas to you all.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas.
And to all a good night.